2020 has been a difficult year for all of us. COVID-19 has changed utterly the way we live our lives and how we interact with others. In Ireland, the discussion around COVID-19 has focused heavily on the impact of the virus on public health, and rightfully so. But COVID-19, both the virus itself and the government's response to it, has also had a devastating impact on the Irish economy and on many Irish businesses.
In terms of businesses that have gone under, there are a few that I know that have done it. Some of the consequences have been tragic, and it's never politic to go much further than that. I think most people can understand what I mean.
This series, a project of ISME, the Edmund Burke Institute and Gript, will look at the impact of COVID-19 and the government's response to COVID-19 on Irish businesses and the overall Irish economy. This episode, the first in the series, looks at the overall picture, the high-level risks currently facing small and medium enterprises, commonly known as SMEs. We want to show you that when we talk about the economy, when we talk about businesses, what we're actually talking about is people. We're talking about communities, and we're talking about what it means for someone to see their life's work slip away from them through no fault of their own. The popular image of Ireland's economy, that it is comprised entirely of big multinational companies, each employing massive amounts of people, is not an accurate one. Those companies exist, and they certainly employ large amounts of people, but the majority of companies in Ireland are small and medium enterprises of the sort ISME exists to represent.
99.8% of businesses in the country are SMEs. And then to look at the impact on that from a social point of view, you're looking at, when you take the state sector out, 3/4 of Irish people with a job, or just under 74% of Irish people with a job, work for an SME. So SMEs are of absolutely systemic importance to the Irish economy, in a way that even the multinationals are not.
So SMEs are important because they employ a large amount of people, but they're also important because of where they employ those people. SMEs bring work to communities where larger companies just wouldn't be interested in setting up.
Once you go beyond the M50 or outside the city conurbations, and we're only really talking about 5 or 6 of those, anyone who has a job outside those areas effectively either works on a farm, they work for the state, they're unemployed, or they have a job with an SME.
Most SMEs are highly committed to the local area around them. They have to be. They sell products to the local community, they hire staff from the local community, they have to support their local community because they need their local community to support them.
For a bigger firm, location in a particular town is a transactional relationship. It relies on the availability of services, utilities, and skill sets. And as long as they are there and the macro environment supports them, they are there. We like to compare it to the relative involvement of the chicken and the pig in the bacon and egg breakfast. The chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. In the same way, a small or medium enterprise that has set up in a local hinterland is there because their family roots are there, and they're not there because of a transactional analysis of utilities, skills and whatnot. They're there because that's their home.
Your local shops, your local news agents, your local pubs, even your local takeaway, all come together to form a network which keeps your local community alive. And it's not just your community, it's communities, some like yours, some different, all across the country that are kept alive by these networks.
People aren't going to move to a place where there's no, what I call, social infrastructure. And social infrastructure is more than just a GA club and a church and a post office. It's also the businesses that actually make those places meaningful economic nuclei that people will want to base a business or live around. Small and medium-sized enterprises and the people that run them and the people that work for them are the blood in the veins of every local town, village and community in the country. And without them, you have no social glue. And we know from the work of Robert Putnam that there are 2 important elements in all societies: social capital and social bridges. The social capital comes from people having shared interests and common interests, whether that be in a community organisation, a local GA team or soccer club, whatever that might be. The bridges are what keep them together and allow for those interests to be formed and brought together.
To give a more accurate image of what makes up the Irish economy, we headed down to meet Siobhan and Claire. Siobhan owns St. Tolet Goat Cheese, a producer, somewhat unsurprisingly, of artisanal goat's cheese products. She has ran the business since 1999 and now employs 8 people, all but one of whom live within 4 miles of the farm.
Hello, my name is Siobhan Garvey and we're here on my farm in Ina, west of Ennis, just south of the Burren in County Clare. Over 20 years ago I did the sensible thing of giving up my permanent and principal teaching job to go goat farming and cheese making here in the west of Ireland.
St. Tolet and the area of Ina are deeply linked, and Siobhan has dedicated herself to keeping the business in the area and supporting that local community rather than taking those jobs out of the community and moving to a larger town.
My grandfather would have come from East Clare, and he was the man who put the farm together here. He was a local primary school teacher just in the school up the road with my granny. Then my dad, Flann Garvey, took over the farm and became the local principal in the school and moved down to Ina School. And I was born and bred here. I'm one of 6 children. And the reason why I came to this was, I suppose, we all went to third level college. We went off in various professional careers. And I thought it was a shame that one of the 6 of us wasn't doing something with the farm. Mum and Dad had always leased the farm out themselves. We'd always kept a couple of donkeys and a few cows, but nothing, we weren't farming really. We were born and bred and educated here. We've been involved in going, organising school tours, coming to the farm within the local area and the county, but outside the county as well, but in the local schools coming. We have good relationships with the secondary schools for children going on TY, a transition year, internships, they come here. We also sponsor the Ina Kilnamona Camogie Club. We've been involved in the club, the fishing club, the local Ina Fishing Club. We're obviously great supporters of all things local, as are the locals to us too. And we buy and source as much local as we can, like we use the local printing office in Ennistimon, and we get great support from the local shops and restaurants in the area. So over the years, as we grew and expanded, was more successful, some people had suggested that I would maybe move into the town of Ennis, build a factory there, or lease a factory there and get bigger and sell more. But for me, my heart is on the farm and on the land and being close to home. It's about the land and doing something sustainable with the farm that will be there for future generations, not just for the here and now. So it wasn't about big business. For me, it was about small business and quality over quantity. And my heart is here in Ina, in Gurperfarna, here in my community, and it's here I want my business and to support my business.
Having started in 1999, Siobhan had already gotten St. Tolet through the last recession, and she expected COVID-19 to do about the same amount of damage to the business. Unfortunately, it proved to be far more of a challenge.
COVID, when it came here, it was the biggest challenge I have faced in business in the 21 years I had in business. When I was first kind of hearing about it and not taking that much notice, I was saying to my partner, John, I said, we survived the last recession and we came out of it. We'll come out of this as well. But when COVID came, it was a totally different game altogether, much more threatening. It affected every aspect of the business. When it first, the 9th of March, I suppose, when reality started to hit slowly but surely, is when I started getting the first calls or emails cancelling orders. And for us goat farmers, it would have been it was at the start of the busy season, because it's Paddy's Day would have been start of the tourist season that we're very dependent on. So I had full cheese house of soft cheese and orders being cancelled. So I mean, first of all, by the end of March, I had lost 75% of my customers of my orders. We were lucky we were in retail. If we had just been food service based, we would have been finished at this stage.
Siobhan pulled through and thankfully was able to protect the jobs of all of her staff. But as a business owner, you don't just need to worry about keeping the business going so you can keep paying yourself a salary. It's not just going to hurt you, it's going to hurt people who depend on you.
We were wondering how were we going to be able to pay our staff. My staff were key in being able to hold on to them. But even just the basic of making payments. Now I suppose I have a very good person in who looks after finances. So we'd have been okay for the first month, but after that it was kind of, you were looking into an empty black hole really. But the demand wasn't there was the problem. I suppose the biggest toll really has been personally on me and on my team, because there was the anxiety and stress in those first, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks, One, there was the anxiety of actually getting COVID, or somebody belonging to us or part of the team getting COVID and somebody getting seriously sick, but also there was the financial worry.
The danger now is that the impact of COVID-19, combined with the impact of government policies, will lead to SMEs failing in a systemic fashion. Traditionally, one of the strengths of SMEs has been that they are so diverse that it was highly unlikely you'd see massive amounts of them fail at the same time across the country. But businesses don't just trade with the public, businesses also trade with each other, and SMEs are coming under pressure on that side of the equation as well.
More than half the business that a lot of these SMEs transact is with other businesses. So when we get to a time like COVID and we say the wet pubs are a problem or restaurants are a problem, people fail to understand the knock-on impact that the closure of a business like that has on the local fruit and veg merchant, the local butcher, the local wholesaler selling coffee and sugar and confectionery. There's a whole ecosystem that every small business, even an old-fashioned wet pub, people seriously underestimate the effect of the closure of one of those, the impact on the income and the money multiplier in a local region that causes.
And that knock-on effect is going to become more and more damaging if large numbers of SMEs begin to fail.
For most SMEs, they rarely have more than 2 months of working capital. Right? So when you have, like company law does state that you're meant to have 3 months of payroll, otherwise you're trading recklessly. But there's both the theory and the practice of business. And you know, most SMEs, I would imagine, at least 1 month in the year, or a very high proportion of them, are not in line with that provision, because all it can take is one big customer to decide to delay payments by 30 days, and you're technically meeting the definition of reckless trading. So a lot of businesses do, by definition, just about make enough money to pay payroll and stay in business.
It's not clear exactly how many SMEs are going to fail, but in the current environment it seems clear that you're talking about the failure of thousands of businesses and the loss of tens of thousands of jobs.
So we're not really going to know what business solvency and survival is going to look like until Q1 or Q2 2021. However, in round numbers, what we would say is taking the CSO business demography, if you take it, every 1% of business mortality is going to take 2,700 firms out of business, and on average, with just over 5 people working on those, you're looking at 16,000 people losing their jobs. So you can factor that up, and we can debate whether mortality post-COVID is going to look like 1%, 2%, 3%, but what we are saying in ISME is it's going to be a non-trivial number. It is going to be in the low number of thousands. We hope it isn't going to be over 5,000, but we are looking at a significant number of business closures. And unfortunately, the characteristic of SMEs is, unlike a big business which has an accounting department and possibly a legal department and a HR function, where there is a structured lead up to insolvency, in SMEs it will be an unstructured big bang insolvency. We won't see it coming. We will just see people getting their notice from their employer, and that's it. Unfortunately, this is the reality of what's going to happen in 2021, but it's not avoidable at this stage.
Each of these closures is obviously a tragedy, both for the entrepreneur and the employees. But each job loss will also hit the finances of the state, and that means less money for health, less money for education, and less money for public services.
For every job that we lose, we go from a net positive to €20,000 in social welfare payments per annum. That's the average tax wedge difference between going onto unemployment and losing, and this is at the lower end of the wage scale. So somebody on about 25,000 a year pays about 4,000 or 5,000 between PRSI and tax. So the difference between them moving from one side with structural payments to being on unemployment benefit is a swing on each job of about €20,000, and they're not contested figures. So, it's short-sighted to not try and keep these businesses open, because in the long run, it'll actually reduce the COVID debt and hangover that we have coming out the far side of this.
Once these businesses are gone, many will stay gone. To start a business, you need an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs are rare, with successful entrepreneurs being even rarer. So we need to ensure that as many businesses as possible get through the period in as good a shape as they can in order to protect employment, but also to protect state services such as the health service. The impact of COVID-19 is obviously an important part of the struggles faced by businesses now, but equally important and far more controllable is the impact of government policies on businesses. There are a number of policy steps that can be taken to ensure as many businesses as possible survive. Policies have been put in place already, and some of those have helped SMEs, but there are areas in which we need to see drastic improvements. TDs generally understand the needs of small businesses because they deal with local businesses all the time in their constituencies. But there is a concern that civil servants who play a key role in writing a policy either don't understand SMEs or are actively suspicious of them.
Engagement doesn't mean that you're being listened to. The importance of the role of SME is routinely misunderstood. There's a suspicion in official circles of anybody who would want to run their own business that isn't a multinational. Senior civil servants have come into these rooms and openly asked us whether or not we were fiddling our expenses, accused us of effectively of fraud and tax evasion. So if that's the level of thinking at the most senior levels of the civil service, Peter Drucker, a famous management thinker, famously said the culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that's the world that you're facing into.
We need to see improvements in relation to rapid testing, and we need to see additional liquidity supports for SMEs. Rapid testing means that we can utilise options other than rolling lockdowns, and that will enable us to get as close to a normal trading environment as possible.
If you look at what's happening across Europe in terms of the impact of lockdowns on people, the lack of a rapid test regime is having a direct deleterious effect on the capacity for businesses to trade as normally as possible while trying to live with COVID. Our view, and it's not just our view, we agree with Mike Ryan and the WHO that lockdown should only be used to gain control of a situation. If you go back to last March, April, Dr. Mike Ryan was saying that you need to chase down the virus and track it down and exterminate it at source. Now, one of the key ways to doing that is having rapid, cheap antigen tests. We've seen that Austria and Slovakia have tested practically entire countries in a very short period of time through using these tests. They're slightly less effective, by 3 to 4% than the tests that have been used through the UCD labs. But there's a massive difference in cost. It's nearly tenfold difference in cost between antigen tests and what are called PCR tests, which are the ones that have been used at the moment. And the turnaround time is vastly different. You can get the result of an antigen test within hours and minutes. It takes days to get the results back from a PCR test. So if you're trying to chase down infection to keep the economy open, you need to get the right combination of those two working. It's not either or. But if you're to strike a ratio, you're probably looking at having 80 to 90% of people going for antigen testing. If they test positive, they go for a PCR test and they isolate. It's not just us saying this. There's loads of literature out there where there are people recommending that this would be the way to go. If we want to keep the economy open and to allow people to trade as normally as possible, that's the only way that we can see it working.
Liquidity supports will, to be blunt, allow businesses to continue trading in a situation in which many of them have seen their costs remain relatively stable, but their ability to take in money and trade having been near totally removed.
But that trade debt is where there's a mounting issue. And when coffee shops hand back the keys, then the coffee supplier doesn't get paid, the landlord doesn't get paid, and there's a knock-on systemic impact that arises from that. So that has not been addressed. And one thing that businesses won't do, particularly small businesses won't do, and it's not my opinion, this is backed up by the numbers, Of the 2 billion that's been announced so far in terms of so-called loan finance, an infinitesimal amount has been drawn down. And it's not so much the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, the SBCI, that's the issue. They are granting valid loan requests that are going through. It's the remaining 20% that's underwritten by AIB and Bank of Ireland that isn't getting funded. And as a result, there's a starving of liquidity. And when you lack liquidity, you get a credit crunch. And when you get a credit crunch, businesses hit the wall.
Taking these steps would protect SMEs, they would protect employees, they would protect the health service and the public finances, and they would protect communities all over this country. Until then, it might be best for us to take a page from Siobhan's book.
You have to be optimistic. I wouldn't be self-employed in this small business, having given up a good, secure job, if I wasn't optimistic.